Tonight, the Prime Minister tells the former Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich that the clock is ticking for him to pay up to £2.5 billion. The Russian billionaire is ordered to donate the proceeds from the sale of the football club, currently frozen in a UK account, to Ukraine or face court action. Also ahead, as resident doctors begin 5 days of industrial action, the Prime Minister condemns the strikes as irresponsible, and NHS bosses call for negotiations to end the deadlock. The government's minister to the EU confirms that the UK will rejoin its Erasmus student exchange scheme. But is it a good deal? And is it the precursor to even closer relations? A lifeline for the plant at Grangemouth as the government announces £120 million of investment to protect 500 jobs. And as the former Chancellor George Osborne announces his latest role as a big cheese at OpenAI, we found out what his new company's ChatGPT tool makes of his career choices since leaving government. All that and more with Laura Faris and Kirsty Blackman. They'll be with us for the next hour. It is Wednesday. I'm Darren McCaffrey, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. A very good evening. Here's billions brought glory and controversy to the Chelsea Football Club, but now the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, who sold the club in 2022, faces the threat of legal action from the UK government if he doesn't pay up to the proceeds of that sale, worth £2.5 billion to the victims of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That was his pledge over 3 years ago, but the money has still remained frozen in a British bank account. And now the government is saying it's going to seek to bring matters to a head, but it's not quite clear how imminent any settlement actually might be. Here's what Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, said at PMQs earlier today.
Today, Mr Speaker, I can announce that we're issuing a licence to transfer £2.5 billion from the sale of Chelsea Football Club. That's been frozen, those funds, since 2022. My message to Abramovich is this: the clock is ticking. Honour the commitment that you made and pay up now. And if you don't, we're prepared to go to court so every penny reaches those whose lives have been torn apart by Putin's illegal war.
Well, let's bring in our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, who is in the newsroom for us this evening. Rob, very good evening to you. This is kind of complicated, isn't it? Because Roman Abramovich did make commitments, if you like, when he sold Chelsea, but not necessarily commitments that the UK government also like.
Every step of this process has required Roman Abramovich's approval. So even though he was sanctioned at the start of the all-out war by Russia on Ukraine, even to sell the club, a process overseen by then Conservative government, needed the Abramovich approval for the licence eventually to go through, for that sale to go ahead. But the cash from that sale has remained frozen since 2022. This impasse over what happens to the funds. We've not heard from Abramovich since 2022, when he said that he wanted all proceeds to go to all victims of the war in Ukraine. That would indicate Russian victims as well. So we've not heard exactly why he's not releasing it. Well, because the government has always been insistent, whether Conservative or Labour, that it should only go to the Ukrainian victims. Maybe some potential leeway, though, I sensed in the government statement today, because it said any future gains earned by the foundation, this is the one that would be created to distribute the funds, can be spent more broadly on victims of conflict worldwide. So maybe there are other conflicts that could be the beneficiaries that perhaps Abramovich wants to be associated with. He was sanctioned over his ties to Vladimir Putin, which he denies at the start of the war. And now we come down to how much money will there be to be distributed. The government statement today said £2.5 billion has to go to the victims of the war. But the most recent accounts from Chelsea's former parent company actually indicates there might only be £923 million, because it says that they will be seeking to effectively release the net proceeds of the sale after allowing for other balance sheet items. That would indicate the loans and debt that's owed to Abramovich, which is £1.54 billion. So maybe there's a disconnect there between the amount we're talking here at play, because this is a process Abramovich did not want to play out. He didn't want to be forced out of owning the club, and Remember back, he was the first big foreign owner to come into English football, to pump billions in, to transform Chelsea's fortunes from 2003. But then along the way, as British-Russian relations deteriorated, he had all sorts of issues gaining a visa even before the outbreak of all-out war as well. And now here we are at this position where the government says Abramovich has his final chance to agree to a deal. But it's unclear what the what or else is. Well, how far would this legal action go? When would it be launched? And is he waiting, perhaps, potentially, for there to be a peace deal? And what would happen then to sanctioned individuals then in terms of their frozen assets remaining frozen?
OK, Rob, live for us there in the newsroom. Thank you very much indeed. Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, has been speaking about this and the wider Ukraine conflict with the Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Foreign Secretary, you say it's time for Roman Abramovich to pay up. Why now?
Well, he's had 3 years. It's 3 years since the commitment was made that the proceeds of the Chelsea sale would go into humanitarian support in Ukraine. He hasn't taken those steps, and that's why we're now issuing this licence and saying that if he doesn't now take those steps, move that money, then we will need to go to court.
But is it because you think that the war could be coming to an end? Is it to prevent him claiming ownership of the cash again if a ceasefire comes into effect? Is there a kind of a rush to do this at this point? Because it seems a bit random otherwise.
That is the result of there's been a huge amount of work and attempts and different efforts at different times to get Roman Abramovich to honour the commitment he made and to do the things that he is supposed to do as a result of the agreement that was signed at that time. That has been tried in different ways through the years, and it's still come to nothing. That's why we're doing the licence. So no, it's not linked to the timing of the work that's underway on the peace process. It's linked to the fact that we've just reached that point. We have tried every possible avenue to get him to do the right thing, and now we are taking this action with the licence.
And Foreign Secretary, you're threatening to take him to court if he doesn't surrender the funds himself. What sort of punishment would you be pushing for if he doesn't comply? What are the consequences for him?
Well, the licence runs, and we are now urging him to honour this licence, to honour the commitments that were made, and to give him a few months in which to do so. If he doesn't, we will then go to court to require that payment to be made. Because, look, this is money that is supposed to go for humanitarian support, for people in Ukraine, maybe for veterans, maybe for children who need support. This is the right thing to do.
The government's determined 2.5 billion goes to Ukraine, but recent accounts indicate Abramovich wants 1.5 billion of that to pay off loans and debts, leaving only $1 billion for Ukraine. Is that acceptable to you?
No. No, it's clear that there was 2.5 billion were the proceeds from the sale of the Chelsea Football Club. That was the commitment that was made as part of the agreement at that time, and that is the money that needs to go into the humanitarian support.
And can he control where the money goes? Because he actually wants it also to benefit all victims of war, and that includes Russians, it would seem. Would you be OK with that?
We've been very clear that the proceeds from the Chelsea sale, the money that is there, that needs to go into humanitarian support in Ukraine. It's the Ukrainian people who have suffered as a result of Putin's aggression, as a result of this war, and that is where this funding needs to go. And so the charitable fund that this funding money needs to go into will be covered by the terms of the licence, and that's where the money must go.
And Foreign Secretary, we're talking about £2 billion towards Ukraine, but there is a massive mega pot sitting in Brussels. That's 210 billion euros of seized Russian assets that the European Commission is now trying to unlock for war loans to Ukraine. The European Commission has proposed an initial 90 billion euro loan funded by Russian assets to go to Kyiv. Belgium is worried about this because they're worried about retribution from Moscow. How close are those funds to being released? Because this has been going on now for months.
We really want the funding from the Russian sovereign assets to be mobilised to support Ukraine. And this goes much more broadly. We want it to happen as rapidly as possible.
This side of Christmas?
So, well, that's what we're hoping, that there are meetings later this week that are taking place in Europe. But we've been supporting that process. We want to act alongside them. But in the end, the principle here is that Russia should pay for the damage that they have done in Ukraine. That's why this is so important. Of course, there's got to be the detailed work in place, but we've been supporting that for a long time. So that's why we're so keen to get this money in to support Ukraine.
The Ukraine contact group yesterday said the coalition of the willing is raising readiness levels, while the Defence Secretary said he's directing funding to get British troops ready to mobilise. If a peace deal is reached in the coming days, is the UK in a position to have troops, ships and jets ready to defend any ceasefire deal in Ukraine by Christmas?
Well, we have been working with other European countries, with other allies for some time as part of the coalition of the willing that the Prime Minister and the French President set up. Brings together a whole series of different countries. But those talks have also been underway at defence level, at armed services level as well, to make sure that we have arrangements and provisions in place and also security guarantees arranged, including involving the US. But look, we take one step at a time. At the moment, we have a huge amount of work on a peace process, but Russia currently is not signing up. And so whilst we've seen huge amounts of effort from the US, from Ukraine, crucially, and supported by Europe to get a peace agreement in place, at the moment, all we've seen is President Putin seeking to escalate war. It's crucial that Russia is under pressure to actually agree and to make sure we can reach an end to the war.
Foreign Secretary, final question. You said you're hopeful that the funds can be released to help with the Ukrainian war effort. Are you hopeful that a ceasefire deal can be reached in the coming days? How close is it? You must know.
We all want to see a just and lasting peace. The issue here is making sure that it can be lasting. It's not just a pause for Putin to be able to just rearm and then come again. But also the crucial thing is to ensure that Russia is under sufficient pressure to actually agree to it. And so you see the two presidents seeking peace, President Trump and President Zelensky, but one President Putin just escalating war. So that's what we still need to see. They need to come to the table and they need to agree to peace.
That doesn't sound very optimistic to me.
So I think that the work that's been done has been hugely positive. There's been a lot of extremely important and positive work done, but we still need to see Russia actually start to agree to things, and that's where I think the pressure needs to be now.
I've got to stop, but, you know, it's going to be the anniversary, the 4th year anniversary in February. Do you think there might be a deal by then? Is that your hope?
I think that's what we all desperately want to see, and nobody wants this more than the Ukrainian people, because we've got to see the just and lasting peace in place for them, given everything that they have been through and everything that they have fought for. That's why we need the peace in place.
OK, Foreign Secretary, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Beth Rigby speaking there to Yvette Cooper. Well, let's bring in our duo for this evening, the SNP Work and Pension spokesperson, Kirsty Blackman, and the former Conservative Minister, Laura Farris. A very good evening to you both. Kirsty, going to start with you. What's your reaction to the Prime Minister's announcement today on Roman Abramovich?
I mean, I think it's important that pressure is kept up, and it's absolutely the case that he signed up to a deal. But, you know, people who are friends and have been friends with Putin and have money that has been sanctioned should be handing that over. I am concerned that we will see a situation where that smaller amount of money is what he's trying to hand over. It was promised for humanitarian causes for Ukraine. That needs to now come forward. And I think it was interesting to hear Yvette Cooper be clear that this is not related to the possibility of a ceasefire. This is not related to the fact that we may have that.
That's, I suppose, the question.
Well, I suppose the Ukrainian people really need it now, and I think that that would be incredibly helpful. But it's just reached the end of the rope, right? There's only a certain amount of time that you can let people have an amount of slack before you need to ratchet that up and say, well, you've had enough time to make this happen. Now we're going to have to lever some threats in here in order to, again, ensure that that humanitarian support is protected, is provided.
Laura?
Well, I think that there's very wide public support for the idea that funds that have been frozen, which are owned by sanctioned individuals, should be used for the benefit of the people in Ukraine. I think that it's, in principle, a good idea to get the money from Abramovich, not least because he has committed to doing that. Well, I think my only question would be, though, there are quite a number of other sanctioned individuals, and I don't think you can just single out one because he's sort of well-known or has made a comment. The other thing I'd say is that I think it is self-evident that it probably is linked to the proximity of some sort of, I'd barely dare call it a peace deal, but resolution. Because I think what they'll want to demonstrate is that the funds, when they're released, are being used for the reconstruction of Ukraine rather than being used for any sort of part of the war effort.
Just to say, I mean, the complication, obviously, around this, though, is also that Abramovich said it should go to, what he sees as all the victims of this war, which would include Russians, not just Ukrainians. I think that's kind of part of the issue. Just on the wider thing, though, we've got this big summit in Brussels tomorrow around, as Beth pointed out, the much bigger sum of over 200 billion euros. And it does seem like the Americans, along with some European countries, but it's primarily the Americans who are trying to stifle all of this. I mean, they've already got a plan for this money, and a lot of it means going to the United States or indeed to Russia. We do just seem to be just entirely caught up in the, frankly, let's be honest, the same arguments, whether it's around a ceasefire or what should happen to this money. As Beth's been saying, it's been going on for months and months and months now.
Yeah, I mean, we've been raising it in Parliament for a significant length of time about these frozen assets. I can understand that Belgium might have issues, for example, around the legality of this. And actually, I didn't think it was totally clear from the clip. My understanding is that Belgium's reticence about it is not so much about war coming their way from Russia, but about legal challenges coming their way from Russia because of the legality of releasing the funds. I think that if you have invaded another country, your right to having those funds is gone, right? I think that the sensible thing is that money is used to support Ukraine, but we're talking about money from sanctioned individuals who shouldn't have that money.
Lord, this is all deeply depressing in the sense that, it's the week before Christmas. As Beth pointed out, the full-scale invasion happened almost 4 years ago. By the way, the Russians have been fighting the Ukrainians in the Donbass for more than a decade. Started in 2014. And yet here we are. And as I say, we feel, are we any closer? I don't know if we are any closer to this all coming to an end.
I think it is at an inflection point.
Okay.
And I think that whether you like it or not, the sort of fairly firm stance that President Trump has taken on this probably means that those two countries are now under a high degree of pressure to reach some sort of resolution. And frankly, there is a need for Ukraine to have the financial support of the international community, and it's not clear whether that's going to be forthcoming anymore. So I think it is reasonable to expect that the conflict is going to come to an end. Whether it holds, what it looks like, what it means for Ukraine, I think is highly unpredictable
Or indeed, yeah.
And I think what the UK government...
our involvement in it as well, in terms of the ceasefire or whatever.
And I think what the UK government is trying to do is to ring-fence some funds for the reconstruction to go towards that effort. Kirsty's right to alight on legal challenges because some of those sanctioned individuals are not personally responsible for invading Ukraine, and that is going to be the provenance of the challenge.
It's a very, very complicated... We're going to have to leave that. We have run out of time. And I'm sure it is one that we're going to return to, this issue, throughout the days and weeks ahead, because we want to talk about the other big story domestically here in the UK today, and that, of course, is the ongoing strike with doctors. The Prime Minister describing the decision by doctors to go on strike as dangerous and irresponsible. Resident doctors in England began a 5-day walkout this morning after rejecting a government offer to end the dispute over pay and jobs. Hospital leaders have urged the two to return to negotiations, saying that strikes are piling pressure on the health service during an already challenging period. Here's our health correspondent, Oshish Joshi.
It's been called a strike at the worst possible time, with flu surging through the NHS the week before Christmas. Doctors are back on the picket line. It's a fight over pay, but also the direction over the future of the health service.
Who should pay?
Patients can't see doctors.
No.
Doctors don't have jobs.
If you want a pay rise, who should pay? Which group of taxpayer?
We're also taxpayers, sir.
No, which group of taxpayers should pay for your pay rise?
I think that should be the
I don't think it's
responsibility of
fair
the
to
Chancellor.
equivocate like a specific group. It's meant to be like a country. Yeah, but but you're going to have to raise taxes to pay. Who should pay?
Some hospitals are warning patients they face a 15-hour wait to see a doctor in the emergency department. Paul's wife Susie was referred by their GP for an MRI scan, but still had to wait over 17 hours.
It's been a very tiring time, and we got seen by a doctor after 18 hours, and we are still now waiting for various scans, or actually to understand if they're going to do the scan yet. Generally, people are sitting there for 11, 12, 14, and as we have 17 hours. And there isn't necessarily any real information coming forward other than we're going to try and see you as quick as we can.
The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, says the strikes have cost the NHS around £500 million so far, and these next few weeks could be the hardest yet.
It is dicey. I was at the operational centre this morning with Jim. I think we're off to a decent start, but this is going to be a challenging 5 days and a really challenging few weeks. And we're doing everything we can to keep the show on the road.
Here at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading, senior consultants tell me they're already exhausted with the worst of winter potentially yet to come.
It puts immense pressure on us. We have to run a safe service, which we've done today and every round of industrial action. And so it's exhausting. I won't sugarcoat that. And so today, most of the consultants and the seniors on the shop floor, we're approaching our shift with a mix of anger and exhaustion.
This is the 14th round of strike action, but the effects continue long after the picket lines have gone. The doctors' strikes bring huge disruption to hospitals, and that's exactly what they're supposed to do. And while there's anger from patients who've had their operations cancelled and the timing of the strikes, there is also some support for the doctors from patients who say the NHS has been failing for some time. And that's exactly what the doctors have been saying too.
Fix our jobs! Fix our pay!
Both sides can bring these strikes to an end, but there's a gulf between them, with suffering patients stuck in the middle. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Reading.
Well, let's bring back in Kirsty and Laura. Laura, I mean, we saw quite a lot of strikes when you guys were in government too. What do you make of this latest one?
Well, first of all, that's my local hospital, the Royal Berks. I think it's really, really irresponsible of the junior doctors, the resident doctors, to be striking at this time, particularly with the enormous pressure that the flu outbreak is putting on hospital places. I think it's really regrettable that the government repealed the strikes minimum service levels bill that we introduced. And that required, in 6 essential services, of which health was one, transport another, education another, that if there was going to be industrial action, a skeleton staff had to be available among that workforce on the scene at any time. That's consistent with international norms. It's sanctioned by the International Labour Organization. And although it was controversial, it was actually effective. So during train strikes, there were minimum services. And I think it's unbelievably irresponsible that they repealed that legislation.
Now, of course, Kirsty, this is England only. Health is a devolved matter. But what do you think it's irresponsible?
I mean, we don't have the strikes in Scotland because we have had a deal with both the doctors, but also with nursing staff, for example, who are paid more than they would be to do the same job in England.
I would say subsidised, of course, by English taxpayers, but that's a whole other argument we won't get into.
Or paid for by Scottish taxpayers,
well,
because
I mean,
that's not how it works.
Scotland gets more out of the bonnet formula than England. It does get a top-up, doesn't it?
That's not how it works. Is because we've got a massive rural population, for example, and need to deliver services over a much wider area to fewer people, which is much more difficult. In terms of the doctors, I think it's absolutely right that people should have the right to strike. I do believe that is the case. I think there are fundamental problems with junior doctors, not with resident doctors, sorry, they're now called, not least the issue that that lack of training places that there is. So, for example, if you are a resident doctor, there's no guarantee that you will get a training place. I mean,
the government do seem that they want to address that, but the big issue, obviously, is pay. pay here. The big argument is that they got a bumper pay rise last year and they can't afford it.
They've had a 30% pay rise over the last 3 years.
Pay is one of the significant issues, but that lack of forward progression is also a significant issue for resident doctors, and they didn't feel that the offer that was made by the Health Secretary was enough. I think the government needs to get back round the table and ask the doctors what it is they are looking for and try to come a bit closer to them. It's very clear the doctors are not accepting the proposals that were put forward by the Health Secretary. The only option to avert strikes is to get round the table. You can't just say, well, we're not doing anything, so don't strike.
Look, Laura, I mean, you know, we had West Street Union the other night. I mean, he accepted that their pay has been eroded, even with that pay rise. You know, you guys didn't pay them enough money for a very long period of time. You know, fair enough, they want to see more money and they've got the right to go out and strike.
I think 30% pay rise over the last 3 years is more than any other comparable public sector or even in the private sector worker would have seen. I think they've got a fair deal, and I don't think they should be holding the government to ransom by choosing to go on strike in order to cause maximum harm. And I think it's really inconsistent with the profession that they've chosen, actually, that they choose strike action at this time.
OK, well, it's going to cause a lot of disruption, as you say, in the lead up to Christmas and with this flu season underway. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. Right, this story and others, of course, going to feature in tomorrow's papers. We've got our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the economist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. That's from 10:30 tonight here on Sky News. Meanwhile, you're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up after the break, the UK has rejoined the Erasmus student exchange scheme as the government seeks closer ties with Brussels. We'll sit down with the Minister for the EU relations next about why the UK is doing this.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
Now, the UK is rejoining the EU's Erasmus scheme as part of the government's push for closer ties with Brussels, being announced today. Erasmus is a student exchange scheme that began way back in 1987. It allows university students to undertake internships abroad in other European countries for up to a year without paying extra fees. Students receive grants for travel and living costs and get university credit for the courses they take abroad. And the scheme has expanded over the years to include volunteering and vocational training. Now, the programme did come to an end as British students couldn't really access it after Brexit on the 1st of January 2021 under Boris Johnson's government's deal. They argued at the time it wasn't value for money and they launched the Turing scheme as a domestic alternative. Now, students will be able to study or train under the EU scheme once again from January 2027. The UK argues that it's negotiated to get a 30% discount on the fees it pays into the Erasmus scheme, but it'll cost around 570 million quid in 2027, with the price for future years to be agreed still with the EU. Well, a bit earlier, I spoke about this to the Minister for EU Relations, Nick Thomas-Simons, and I began by asking him effectively whether this really was good value for money. Have a watch. It's going to cost 570 million quid. How much are we going to see back?
So, first of all,
there is no answer to that,
the principle is that there is a fair balance between participation and contribution. Now, I have secured a 30% discount for the UK's participation for 2027. What I will then do, because you're absolutely right to challenge me about value for money, I will, 10 months after that, have an exercise carried out looking at the number of British people in the United Kingdom, who are signing up relative to that issue of participation to absolutely ensure we get value for money. That is the test that I apply in my negotiation with the European Union. But can I also just say this as well, because for anyone watching this, I want them to know that this is something that isn't just about student exchanges, hugely important though they are. It might be, for example, for someone on an engineering apprenticeship who might want to spend some time overseas. It might be, this morning I was talking actually to someone who wants to be a basketball coach, talking about wanting to spend some time overseas. So whatever your passion in life is, we want to see you have that opportunity. And I am determined to make sure people from disadvantaged backgrounds are not.
I mean, almost certainly we'll lose money, but, you know...
I don't agree.
Well, we'll see. When did you first realise that we should rejoin the Erasmus scheme?
So this was something that I was negotiating in the first phase of the reset with the European Union. So between coming into office in July 2024...
Because the government last year spent all of last year saying that we weren't going to rejoin Erasmus.
No, it's...
I mean, the Prime Minister's spokesperson literally last summer said there are no plan to rejoin the Erasmus scheme.
No, it's in the Common Understanding in May. It is in the text of the Common Understanding in May 2025 that I negotiated with.
So it was only this year that you realised?
That I was negotiating with the European Union. I am absolutely delighted to now have moved forward to actually make participation a reality in 2027.
No, but you can understand the confusion. So it wasn't in the manifesto. The government spent literally last year saying we had no plans. This year you have. So it is this year that you decided that we wanted to rejoin the Erasmus scheme. Is that right?
So I'm not going to go into the details of negotiations I've been having week by week over the past 18 months.
It's about when you realised as a minister, when the government realised rejoining the Erasmus scheme was a good thing to do.
But what I have been... Well, let me come to that, because obviously the point of decision, the point at which the Prime Minister signed on the dotted line was in May, and it's public, it's in the Common Understanding text in answer to your question. But also it's about looking at what are the existing arrangements, judging them in government, and then can we make them better? So we have a Turing scheme at the moment that benefited in the last year, I think it was just over 43,000 people. This can benefit over 100,000 people, much bigger scheme, but it's also much wider. And this, just let me finish this point, because the Turing scheme is about schools, colleges, university, obviously important. But the Erasmus Plus scheme is much wider, whether that is in terms of youth work, whether that is in terms of staff exchange. So this is about increasing opportunity.
And
for
the reason
people.
I asked the question, you might think it's a very odd question for me to ask about the timing of all of this, because I will ask the same question about, do you think we should rejoin the customs union?
No, we are not rejoining the customs union.
So this is my point. So you can understand, literally in 2024, we've got no plans to rejoin the Erasmus scheme. It wasn't in the manifesto. We're now in 2025. Rejoining customs union was not in the manifesto, and you're saying it's not going to happen. And you can understand that. Can you give a cast iron guarantee that we will not rejoin the customs union this Parliament.
Yes, and let me just explain to you why that is. The mandate that I had to negotiate, I started the work in opposition, and then in our manifesto there were 3 red lines. We would not go back to freedom of movement, we would not go back to the customs union, we would not go back to the single market. But within that, the manifesto was crystal clear. We were going to negotiate a closer UK-EU relationship that was going to be in the interests of the British people and deliver for the British people. That is precisely the framework I'm negotiating in, and that is why I'm delighted to be announcing this
I just think in our
today.
relationship with Europe, I mean, there was a lot of manifesto pledges made around taxation that seemed to have broken. You literally didn't include this in your manifesto. I think if I was a Brexiteer sitting here, I would say this is a Labour government that is incrementally potentially going to take us into lots of that Brexit negotiation, lots of that Brexit deal that you say at the moment you're not going to do, but who knows?
Well, Nigel Farage himself talked about being in Erasmus but outside the EU, so I totally reject the idea that's being put about somehow
you also slagged
Brexit.
off Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. Now you're implementing it.
No, I'm improving. No, that's not true. I am improving it.
I mean, around the edges, you're largely implementing a Brexit deal that you argued at the time was bad for Britain.
No, we are improving the bad deal. And I'll tell you the difference. I'll tell you that. No, I don't accept that.
Okay. So, what economic benefit in percentage terms, GDP, are the current Labour changes going to make to the British economy?
So we have
negligible.
Hang on. First of all, there is a range of things. There is, first of all, the food and drink agreement, which is going to be that together with our linking of our emissions trading systems, which will have a much bigger carbon market. It will mean that carbon taxes will not be levied on British firms. It's going to save British firms hundreds of millions of pounds. With regard to the SPS and agreement and that taken together, that will be worth by 2040 £9 billion to the UK economy. But that is without the other measures I've announced today, the entering of talks to link the UK and the EU's electricity trading systems, which is going to have significant benefits for energy security and indeed for lowering costs.
Well, let's get thoughts on that with Kirsty and Laura, who are with me. First of all, on Erasmus, I mean, you must be pretty happy about this.
Delighted. We should never have left the Erasmus scheme in the first place, and we argued that at length during the Brexit processes that happened in the House of Commons. I mean, this is a good thing for young people to be able to access the EU in a way that they now can't, unless they're studying. Through Erasmus, they'll be able to do this through Erasmus. But actually, when I was young, if I had wanted to spend 3 months in a foreign country or longer than that in a foreign country, I would have had the ability to do that in the European Union. Young people today can't have that. My kids don't have those same opportunities. The Erasmus at least brings us a little bit closer to those opportunities. So I think it's an immensely positive thing.
Well, in general, I'm really supportive of all kind of exchange programmes like this. But one of the things that didn't really get a mention in your piece was the Turing scheme that we introduced as a substitute. And we did try and address some of the weaknesses of Erasmus that Nick Thomas-Symonds actually just touched on. It was historically very poor at reaching disadvantaged students. It tended to be very middle-class students who went off to Europe, and the Turing scheme had a much better record on accessing disadvantaged students. It also opened up the rest of the world. When we live in a multicultural society where many people here's country of origin is much further afield than the EU. So we had the scheme engaged countries like Pakistan and India. So I would be, whilst I actually really support student exchange schemes, I wouldn't just rule out the effectiveness of the Turing scheme.
We're not going to get rid of Turing. What do you think about my argument there about whether, given the fact that it does feel that the Labour government is now on a train going in a certain direction, that do we really believe Labour ministers when they say there's a cast-iron guarantee that we will not be rejoining the customs union?
Struggling to believe Labour ministers about anything. They said they'd give us £300 off our energy bills. They said they'd tackle the cost of living crisis. Things are not going the direction that they promised that it would go. Hey, if they want to get us a closer relationship with the EU in terms of a customs union, in terms of a much better relationship for our businesses, I think that is a brilliant thing. We've always argued we should never have left the customs union or the single market. Being in the EU was a massive trading partner on our doorstep that we voluntarily walked away from. So that relationship, I think, would be very good for improving GDP. The government's mission is growth, right?
Well,
that would be a great thing.
That's a questionable question these days. Some might suggest. Laura, what do you think about this? I mean, I think there is an argument to be made. I mean, and the government might well make this argument in years to come about kind of our relationship with Europe and the customs union, about the impact on the economy. But I suppose from a Brexiteers' point of view, they would argue, well, we didn't vote for any of this because it was not in the manifesto.
Oh, I think, you know, you can dissect the meaning of the Brexit vote till you're blue in the face.
And we have done that many times.
Look, I think there is an ambition to get closer to the European Union. To be completely honest, I'm an outsider now. I don't think they will necessarily get a second term that they would need to enact that. And I also think you'd have to put it back to the public because it's such a sort of boiling point type issue that I think you'd need some sort of public assent, or you'd have to have it in a manifesto, I think, as a point of democratic consent.
Well, we shall see. We will see. We don't want to constantly bring the Brexit argument back up again, but it is something I think this government's going to return to time and time again, as we saw today. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. You are watching the Politics Hub here on Sky News. Up next, why problems remain for Britain's biggest chemical plant, despite a government bailout. We'll be talking about that next. Now, the country's biggest chemical plant will remain open following a government bailout worth more than £120 million. The deal will protect around 500 jobs at Grangemouth plants, but the critical piece of the national infrastructure is still beset by problems, as our economics editor, Ed Conway, now explains.
An 11th hour rescue for one of Britain's most important industrial sites. 500 jobs safeguarded as the government puts £120 million of taxpayer money into Grangemouth. The alternative? Certain closure, says the business secretary. What would have happened, do you think, if you hadn't have stepped in?
If we hadn't have stepped in, there's no question that this plant would have been gone.
Really?
Yeah. There's no question that this plant probably, the notice probably would have gone out before Christmas.
It was that close?
That imminent, yeah. It was that imminent.
And that's a big deal because what they make here is an essential building block for the modern world. Ethylene is one of those base chemicals. There's precursors that goes into all sorts of things. I mean, plastics most obviously, but also things like polyester and a whole kind of constellation of different products. And in order to make it, what you have to do is you basically have to heat up really high temperatures. You have to heat up ethane, which comes in, sometimes gas, sometimes oil, which comes through these furnaces, and then cracks it, literally kind of cracks it and turns it into this other chemical, ethylene, which then goes into pipelines which go around the country. This is the last one standing. But alongside the economics, there's the politics. Not for nothing did 3 Secretaries of State travel to Grangemouth today. They want people to know they are here to save jobs.
This is a significant investment by the UK government today, over £120 million to secure, of course, the 500 jobs here at the ethanol cracker at Grangemouth, but more than that, the jobs in the supply chain as well, and not just for this year, but for many years to come.
The challenge for them is that it's hard not to see today's funding, like the money provided to British Steel and Jaguar Land Rover earlier in the year, as a sort of stopgap, because, well, that's kind of what it is. The real reason this is happening, I think you can boil it all down to, is the fact that right now the price at which INEOS can sell its ethylene in Europe is actually lower than what it costs them to make it. So even though this money is going to help, certainly for a few years, it's quite hard to see how it deals with something quite deep-seated facing the European chemicals industry. In other words, this is unlikely to be the last you'll hear about Britain's struggling chemicals sector.
In short term, is this how do we get through next year? And in long term, is the real difficult how do you tackle energy costs? Because that is structurally a European issue. The fact that Europe is de-industrialising because of carbon tax while the rest of the world doesn't have it is a big thing. So
that hasn't been resolved?
That hasn't been resolved.
Still, perhaps what matters most for the people here in Grangemouth is that days before Christmas there is, finally, some good news. Jobs saved in the nick of time. All those questions will have to wait until next year. Ed Conway, Sky News in Grangemouth.
OK, let's bring back in Laura and Kirsty with me in the studio. 120 million quid, it's quite a lot of money. Why have you guys not put this money forward before now?
I mean, the UK government's responsible for energy. The UK government's got
but
an
it's
ability
in Scotland.
to...
Rachel Rees said you've been sitting on the sidelines over this.
The UK government's got an ability to borrow that we don't have. This is a reserved thing, and therefore it's a responsibility of the UK government. The Scottish government's been working alongside...
literally couldn't find the money anywhere.
We've been working alongside the UK government around Grangemouth and trying to protect jobs. Do you know what? I'm delighted that this is happening. I'm really pleased the UK government is putting in £120 million. I'm really pleased, and I really do hope that these 500 jobs will be saved. But I think that, as was highlighted in that piece, this is a stopgap, right? Rachel Rees was asked today about the Energy Profits Levy and the fact that that continues to increase and create problems for energy prices. The fact that actually, in order to get the oil, in order to get the energy that they need to create the product that they're creating, it's much more difficult to do that because of the UK government's fiscal position. The UK government needs to properly understand energy and industry in Scotland, and it's failing to do that right now.
As I say, let's build out this plan. Just briefly on this law, I mean, you know, government bailed out a steel plant earlier on this year as well. Emergency Parliament being recalled. We do seem pretty bad at trying to manage some critical infrastructure in this country.
It's exactly the same as the Scunthorpe Steelworks. And again, it does come down to energy costs. And it is actually Ed Miliband's mad policy and the carbon taxes he's imposing.
Come on. This is not just a thing that's been happening for the last 18 months.
You know, it's exactly what Jim Ratcliffe, who's the boss of INEOS, said, though. If we want to have a serious industrial policy, we can't have the highest energy prices in Europe. And it is time to look again at getting the oil out of the North Sea and bringing down our energy costs.
OK, well, many might have said that should have been happening for the last couple of years, but we're going to leave it there because we're actually going to turn on to, just to briefly, another story coming out of the United States. We've got pictures from Dover Air Force Base in Delaware in the US, where Donald Trump is witnessing the transfer of 2 members of the Ohio National Guards and 1 US civilian who were killed in Syria last week. They were Sergeant Edgar Tovar and Sergeant William Howard, who, as I say, died in Syria, along with a translator, a civilian translator, when they were ambushed by the Islamic State in Syria. President Trump giving the salute there to the coffins as they arrived back in Delaware. OK, you're watching the Politics Hub here on Sky News. Up next, George Osborne says he's got another job and he's joining the world's most exciting company. But my word, he's had more jobs than I've had mince pies. We'll be looking back at all those jobs after he left government and having a little bit of fun with it too. Stay tuned.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, the government on a collision course with former Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich over £2.5 billion that he was supposed to donate to victims of the war in Ukraine. Also ahead, resident doctors start their 5-day strike. I'll speak to one of them who says it is not about pay. And we'll discuss the Snicko shocker as Australian officials apologise for a controversial tech error in the Ashes. All that, much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre. Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent. A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a 5th Putin term mean for Russia and the world? Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West. Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News? Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Welcome to the world.
Come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? This is the war game.
There were a number of armed security.
We want to discover, to find out what's really going on.
Everything you need to know about British politics in about 20 minutes.
I actually don't like political drama.
So, where next?
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, the former Chancellor George Osborne has a new job. Yes, another one. As Managing Director and Head of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. He's called it the most exciting and promising company in the world and said that he was honoured to join the team. I think it's fair to say that he's had a pretty checkered career since leaving government. Now, I wonder, and my word, it's a long list of the jobs he has had since he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. Kirsty, Laura, how many of them do you think you could name?
3?
Very few, I think.
Roby Warshaw, Evening Standard, British Museum.
I was just about British Museum and possibly
He's got
Evening
his
Standard.
podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
He's got his podcast. He also is, I think, still at Evercore. He's also been at BlackRock. That was the big one after he left government. He's also a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institute. He's a part of the Kissinger Fellow. I mean, it is endless. It is endless, isn't it? I mean, he's clearly a man in demand. We've actually been a bit naughty. We put a C3 through ChatGPT, of course, the company's AI tool, and asked him to give an assessment of what it makes of his career since he stepped on from being a Conservative MP. So here we go. Let's have a look at the positives. He's definitely very good at maintaining influence. There's no doubt about that, about bridging politics, finance, media and culture. And to be fair, not all politicians can be good at this. He's pretty good at maintaining relevance post-office. But I'd definitely go for the first negative on that list. It's a bit of a revolving door problem. He does seem to be in and out of jobs quite a lot, though he does certain times seem to have quite a lot of jobs all at the same time. I think there was one time he had 8 jobs, didn't he? I mean, is this a career post-politics that you would aspire to, Kirsty?
Absolutely not. Do you know what? I don't think I fancy any of the things that he's done.
I think the British Museum's pretty cool now.
It is pretty cool, but not for me. It's not the kind of thing. In fact, I would just return everything if I was there, it would be pretty empty
then the museum
pretty
would
quickly.
close down.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think about this sense? I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, for politicians, particularly really senior politicians after, you know, you've kind of left the world of Westminster politics to kind of find and forge a career path, and sometimes even to get a job itself.
Yeah, actually, I have to say, I have noticed that some ex-MPs do find it difficult to get a job. So I think George has done really well. But on the revolving door issue, there is a 2-year embargo on any ex-minister getting a job that involves direct contact with the government. So that's actually quite a strong restraint on using some of the skills that you might feel you have.
So you kind of feel that you're not necessarily going to... Let's have a look at what is the bottom line assessment, eventually, of George Osborne's career. Apparently, he's strategically brilliant, but democratically uncomfortable. By the way, this is not us saying this. This is ChatGPT, who's going to go and work for. It demonstrates how a modern political elite can exit office, avoid scrutiny, but also that whether he's seen as a statesman or part of elite capture depends on your view, particularly ethically, and indeed Britain's governing class. The thing is, though, as you touched upon, Laura, you know, as it being a politician trying to get a job, it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world.
It's not necessarily the easiest, and he has done really well and has made a huge success of his post-politics.
Well, and I think it's also fair to say, because he's made a lot of money.
I'm sure he has made a lot of money. I'm sure he's not the only ex-politician to leave politics and make a lot of money. I think, you know, where he is in terms of ChatGPT, I'm not sure it's where I would have gone. I think there are major ethical concerns when it comes to the mass use of AI that he's propagating. So let's see how this goes.
Definitely a man that we've not heard the end of. George Osborne there, going to work off for AI and ChatGPT. Thank you very much indeed, Laura Kirsty, and Merry Christmas to you both, because we will almost certainly not see each other, given the fact that it's next week. Have a really, really good time. That is it for me for tonight. We're back for our last show before Christmas at 7 tomorrow. Up next, it's the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee. Goodbye.